September 19, 1944. 6:17 hours. A fog-shrouded wood east of Nijmegen, Netherlands. The damp smell of leaf rot and diesel exhaust hangs in the cold air. Sergeant James Jim, or of the British 4th/7th Royal Dragoon Guards, stubs out a cigarette against the glassy plate of his Sherman tank, Adventure. The metallic taste of adrenaline from the previous day's fighting hasn't left his mouth. His unit, part of the massive Operation Market Garden Push, is scattered, exhausted, and confused. Radio chatter is a frantic, overlapping mess of call signs and broken reports. And now new orders. They arrive not as a clear signal, but as a fragmented, urgent series of commands passed from brigade to regiment to squadron. The words, crackling over the radio, are unambiguous. Proceed immediately to secure the bridge at Nijmegen. Hold at all costs. Prevent enemy crossing. Await relief. 3 tanks receive the directive. Adventure, commanded by Sergeant or Antelope, under Sergeant Leslie Tichbone. And Angler, led by Sergeant John Jack Ellis. 3 Shermans, crews running on nerves and cigarettes, are detached from the main force. They grind their way through the narrow, mist-laden Dutch lanes, tracks chewing mud, turrets scanning the gray, tree-lined horizons. The world shrinks to the view through a periscope. You can almost feel the shudder of the 400-horsepower engine through the soles of your boots, the constant, low-grade tremor of being inside 30 tons of moving steel. They break from the tree line, and there it is, a slender, unremarkable concrete bridge spanning the Maasval Canal. It is silent. Eerily so. No screaming Stukas, no crump of artillery, no rattle of machine guns that has been the soundtrack of their war. Just the idle of their own engines and the call of distant crows. They assume their positions with professional efficiency. Adventure takes the near side, covering the eastern approach. Antelope and Angler position themselves on the opposite bank, guns trained west. They establish fields of fire, rotate their turrets, and wait. The first hour ticks by. Then 2. The fog burns away to reveal a crisp autumn day. The only movement is the slow drift of clouds and the canal's current. Sergeant Bone, peering through his binoculars, is the first to voice it. A low murmur over the radio net. Jim! Jack! Where's the enemy? The relief force they were promised does not appear. The logistical tail of the British XXX Corps is nowhere to be seen. The bridge itself is structurally intact, but it feels forgotten. The orders had been specific, the tone desperate. Yet here, there is only a profound, unsettling quiet. The 3 tank commanders exchange wary glances from their open hatches. They have been given a sacred task, the defense of a vital objective. But as the sun climbs higher, a gnawing doubt takes root. They are guarding a ghost. And the real secret isn't on the bridge. It's in the silent woods behind them, and in the radio silence from headquarters that is beginning to feel less like luck, and more like a terrible, isolating mistake. By mid-afternoon, the silence has become a physical weight. The initial vigilance, gunners' hands on triggers, commanders sweeping the landscape with unblinking eyes, has given way to a tense, puzzled stillness. Corporal Reginald Reg Sims, the wireless operator in Adventure, has been cycling through the frequencies. Static. Bursts of distant, unrelated traffic. Nothing for them. Sergeant Jack Ellis, a practical man from Yorkshire, makes a decision. I'm going to have a proper look, he announces over the net. He dismounts from Angler, his Thompson submachine gun slung, and walks to the center of the bridge. Not a tactical crouch, but a straight-backed, deliberate inspection. He kicks a piece of shrapnel, watching it clatter and spin into the water below. The sound is shockingly loud in the vacuum. He looks east, down the road his little force had traveled. He looks west, toward the city of Nijmegen, where a titanic battle is supposedly raging. The roads are empty. The fields are fallow. A civilian bicycle lies abandoned in a ditch, but there is no sign of war, nor of the friendly armies they are meant to be connecting. Back in his turret, Sergeant Jim studies his map for the 100th time, the acetate overlay smudged with grease pencil marks. The bridge at Nijmegen is strategic. It should be a lifeline for the British ground advance to link up with the paratroopers at Arnhem. But the symphony of war has a predictable sound, the deep bass of artillery and the staccato percussion of small arms. Here, there is only the faint, discordant echo of that symphony, miles away. The pieces don't fit. It is then that Reg Sims, headphones pressed tight to his ears, stiffens. "Sergeant!" Picking up a Royal Engineer's net, faint but clear. He scribbles furiously on a pad. The message is a fragment, but its meaning is ice cold. "Causeway at Human intact and secured by 5th Division as of 1,200 hours yesterday." Yesterday. The words hang in the stuffy interior of the tank. Or grabs the microphone for the squadron frequency, his voice tightly controlled. "All stations, Adventure? Stand by." He has Reg attempt to raise headquarters to request clarification and to report their position. The reply, when it finally crackles through, is a confused signals officer miles to the rear. The officer has no record of any order dispatching 3 Shermans to Human Bridge. Their own squadron commander believes they are in reserve, refueling. The truth detonates, silent and devastating. There was no desperate holding action. No pending relief. The frantic orders had been a phantom, a product of the fog of war, a misheard command, or a panicked relay from a broken chain. They are not heroes guarding a vital artery. They are 3 lost tanks, guarding a bridge that had already been secured, operating on instructions that had ceased to exist almost as soon as they were given. But as this humiliating realization settles, a new, more immediate dread replaces it. They have been sitting in plain sight, engines idling, for over 8 hours. If they can hear distant battles, who else might have heard them? The setting sun casts long, skeletal shadows from the woods. And in those woods something glints. Not the glass of a farmer's window. The cold, opaque glass of a German field commander's binoculars. The glint was no illusion. In the deep, damp shadows of the pine forest, roughly 400 yards northwest of the bridge, Oberleutnant Franz Weber of the 9th Panzer Division's Reconnaissance Battalion lowered his Skirnfernrohr scissors periscope. A meticulous man, he noted the time in his leather-bound logbook, *17:48. Drei Sherman Panzer. Bruckhuman. Stationer, *. For Weber and his depleted Kampfgruppe, a ragged collection of a dozen Panzer Grenadiers, 2 elderly 75mm anti-tank guns horse-drawn into camouflaged positions, and a single, precious Mark IV Panzer with a patched-up hull, the appearance of the British tanks was both a threat and a puzzle. They had been ordered to harass the Allied flank, to gather intelligence, to survive. A direct assault on 3 Shermans was suicide. But to abandon the field? Unthinkable. Weber saw what the British sergeants, in their focus on the empty bridge, had missed: their profound isolation. No supporting infantry in ditches. No scout cars buzzing up and down the roads. No traffic. These were not guardians of a vital crossing, they were orphans. And in war, an orphaned unit is a target of opportunity. He issued a series of soft, guttural commands. The Panzer Grenadiers, in their field gray and splinter-patterned camouflage smocks, slithered forward to new positions, setting up their MG-34 machine guns with clear, intersecting fields of fire on the road leading to the bridge. The anti-tank crews, muscles straining, began the agonizingly slow, silent process of hand-cranking their gun trails to adjust their aim by mere degrees. Theirs was not the glory of the blitzkrieg. It was the patient, murderous craft of the ambush. Back at the bridge, the British crews now grappled with a command crisis born of their revelation. Sergeant Ellis and Angler argued for immediate withdrawal. "We're ghosts, Jim. We vanish. We report the error and rejoin the squadron." Sergeant Bone and Antelope was more cautious. "Orders were orders, even if they're bollocks. What if we pull back, and the Germans were just waiting for that? We'd have left a bridge unguarded on an assumption." Sergeant Orr, the senior man, felt the crushing responsibility. The military sin of abandoning one's post warred with the tactical idiocy of holding a meaningless one. He made a compromise decision, one that would seal their fate. "We hold till last light," he declared. "At dusk we displace. One at a time, back down the eastern route we came. Adventure first, then antelope, angler as rear guard. That gives us purpose, and a clean break. It was a sensible plan. But it was a plan made in ignorance of the audience now watching their every move. As Orr relayed the orders, the crews relaxed infinitesimally. A hatch on Antelope opened wider, and the loader, seeking a breath of air less saturated with cordite and sweat, exposed his head and shoulders. A kettle was lit on a small stove on the back of Adventure's engine deck, a tiny plume of steam rising like a signal. To Oberleutnant Weber, these were not signs of relaxation. They were signs of permanence. The British were settling in. They had no intention of leaving. His earlier suspicion, that they were the vanguard of a larger force, hardened into certainty. He could not wait for an ideal moment. He had to create one. He needed to freeze them in place, to make them believe the threat was behind the bridge, not in front of it. He turned to his radio operator. Contact Führerzauber. Single round. On the western roadway, 200 meters beyond the bridge. Genoa. Führerzauber, fire magic, was the call sign for the lone Mark IV Panzer, hidden in a hay shed a kilometer away. The British crews never heard the shot. They only heard the sudden, deafening whip-crack explosion as a 75mm high-explosive shell tore a blackened crater into the road on the far side of the canal. Dirt and shrapnel pattered against Antelope's side. Every British turret snapped west, guns traversing, searching for a ghost that wasn't there. They were now fully committed, facing the wrong way, their backs to the real, patient killers in the woods. The crater on the western road smoked like a fresh wound. In an instant, the fragile, philosophical calm of the British tankers shattered. Training took over, ruthless and absolute. Contact west! Sergeant Orr's voice barked across the net tight and sharp. Adventure's turret whined as Gunner Corporal Phil Dowger Green traversed it, his eye glued to the telescopic sight, scanning the distant tree line for the telltale muzzle flash. Nothing! I see nothing! Inside Angler, Sergeant Ellis swore. It's a sniper! A bloody tank sniper! He's hold down somewhere! The shot had been deliberately misplaced, a ranging shot or a warning, but its message was clear: the west was hostile territory. Their planned escape route to the east now felt like an exposed nerve. To turn and run would present their thinner side and rear armor to that unseen, accurate gun. Oberleutnant Weber watched from the woods, a faint, grim smile touching his lips. The British reaction was perfect. They had coalesced into a defensive knot, facing his decoy. He raised his hand, holding the attention of his anti-tank gun commander. He would wait. Let the tension cook them a little longer. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour. The British crews were at high alert, every sense screaming. The smell of hot metal, sweat, and now a new tang, fear, filled the fighting compartments. The loader in Antelope, driver Tom Biscuit Barker, cracked open his hatch again, not for air, but to listen. The world had gone silent again, save for the idle of their engines. It was worse than the explosion. Maybe it was a lone gun, Barker ventured over the intercom. A last ditch. The sentence died as the woods erupted. It was not the single, aristocratic crack of the distant Panzer. This was a vicious, ripping snarl of automatic fire and the sharper, more brutal bang-bang of the two 75mm anti-tank guns. Weber had chosen his moment not for maximum destruction, but for maximum psychological shock. Tracer rounds from the MG-34s, glowing a malignant green in the fading light, stitched a dancing pattern of death across Adventure's hull, sparking and ricocheting off the thick frontal plate in a fireworks show of terror. But it was the anti-tank guns that were the killers. The first armor-piercing round struck Antelope low on the glassy plate with a sound like a monstrous bell being struck by a sledgehammer. It did not penetrate the 50mm of frontal armor, but it glanced. The kinetic energy transfer was monstrous. Inside, the crew was thrown violently against their stations. The driver's head slammed against his periscope housing. The world became a cacophony of ringing metal and stunned cries. The second gun targeted Angler. Its shot was a near miss, screaming past the turret and plowing a furrow in the earth just beyond, showering the tank in dirt and debris. It was a correcting shot. Enemy in the woods! Northwest! Guns, guns, guns! Sergeant Ellis roared, his voice cracking. Engler's turret began to swing, but it was too slow. The German gunners, drilled to a pitiless efficiency, were already reloading. From his vantage, Sergeant Orr saw it all. He saw the muzzle flashes, winking like deadly fireflies in the deep green gloom. He made a calculation that took less than a second. They could not win a static duel. The Germans had the cover, the preparation, and the angle. Smoke! All stations, launch smoke! Pull back! Now! Not east-south, into the field! Go, go, go! Wrenching levers, drivers threw their tanks into reverse, then spun the steering sticks. Canister projectiles hummed from smoke dischargers on the turrets, billowing into thick, white-gray clouds between them and the woods. It was a screen, but a thin one. As Adventure lurched backwards off the road into the soggy field, the German anti-tank guns fired again. This time, they found their mark. The round hit Antelope on its left-hand drive sprocket as it tried to turn. There was a catastrophic, grinding explosion of metal. The track was severed, whipping back like a severed limb. The tank slewed violently, dug its nose into the soft earth, and came to a lopsided, helpless stop. It was a mobility kill, a metal beast with a broken leg, now trapped in the open as the white smoke began to thin. Inside Antelope, Sergeant Tichbone tasted blood in his mouth. His driver was slumped, unconscious or dead. The intercom was a screech of static. Through his periscope, he saw the woods and the next muzzle flashes already blooming within them. They were aiming for the kill shot. He had one choice. One desperate, terrible order for his crew. Bail out! Everyone out! Now! The hatches of the crippled Antelope flew open. Men spilled out like sailors abandoning a sinking ship, scrambling over the hot, smoke-stained steel. The loader, driver Barker, half-dragged the dazed driver from his compartment. Sergeant Bone was the last out, shoving his wounded wireless operator ahead of him. They hit the damp Dutch earth not a second too soon. A second anti-tank round screamed in. It struck Antelope's turret ring with a cataclysmic crang, not penetrating but jamming it solid. Had the crew been inside, they would have been concussed, trapped, or killed by spalling. Instead, they crawled, stumbled, and ran through the churned mud towards the dubious cover of a shallow drainage ditch 20 yards away. The German machine gunners had seen them. Green tracer fire hosed the ground, kicking up fountains of dirt at their heels. One of the crew, the gunner, Private Alan Shaw, cried out, spun, and fell. Bone didn't look back. He couldn't. He grabbed Shaw's webbing and hauled him, a dead weight, into the ditch as bullets snapped the reeds above their heads. On the southern edge of the field, Adventure and Angler had found a semblance of cover behind a low, earthen dike. Their turrets were still trained on the woods, firing back now. The 75mm guns roared, shells exploding amongst the pines, sending splintered wood and smoke into the air. But they were firing blind, at concealed positions, while the German guns had a stationary, metallic bullseye in the stranded Antelope. "We have to cover them!" Ellis yelled over the radio to Orr. "Bone's lot are pinned in that ditch!" Orr knew it. He also knew the tactical truth: to stay was to die. The German Panzer, Führerzauber, had yet to fully reveal itself. This was a fixing action. The real hammer blow was still to come. But the sight of his men, his friends, huddled in a watery trench under fire, overrode the cold calculus. "Angler, keep up suppressive fire on the tree line. 5 rounds rapid. I'm going for them." It was an act of near-suicidal bravery. Adventure lurched forward from behind the dike, its engine roaring in protest as Orr ordered it not away from danger, but directly towards it. He wasn't going to fight. He was going to rescue. The Sherman rumbled across the open field, a colossal, slow-moving target. Almost immediately, the German fire shifted. A 75mm anti-tank round slammed into the earth just in front of its right track, the explosion heaving the tank sideways. Machine gun fire clattered against its side armor in a continuous, deafening drumroll. Inside, it sounded like 1,000 frenzied metalworkers trying to beat their way in. Or stood tall in the commander's hatch, exposed from the waist up, guiding his driver. Left! Hard left! Now straight! Go! Bullets zipped past him, one tearing the sleeve of his battle dress. He didn't flinch. His world had narrowed to the ditch ahead and the men waving frantically from it. Adventure ground to a halt, its bulk between the ditch and the German guns. It became a metal wall. Loader! Hatch open! Get them in! Or bellowed. One by one, the crew of Antelope, carrying their wounded gunner, scrambled up the side of the Sherman, dropping into the open loaders and drivers' hatches, tumbling into the cramped, hot belly of the tank. Sergeant Bone was the last. He locked eyes with Orr for a split second, a look of pure, unspoken gratitude, before disappearing inside. The tank was now dangerously overloaded. But it was also out of time. From the west, a new, deeper engine note joined the fray. A diesel growl. Through the smoke and settling dusk, the long barrel of the German Mark IV Panzer emerged from behind the hay shed, its hull still wreathed in shadows. Führerzauber had arrived. And it had a clear shot at the stationary, overloaded Adventure. Driver! Reverse! Maximum revers! Orr screamed, dropping into the turret and slamming the hatch shut just as the world outside erupted in a flash of orange. The German Panzer had fired. The world dissolved into sound and fury. The German shell did not strike Adventure's hull. It was a near miss, but of the most devastating kind. It impacted the low earthen dike just beside the tank's left track with a volcanic explosion. The force of the blast lifted the 30-ton Sherman like a toy, heaving it onto its right side. Inside, it was the end of the world. Men were thrown against steel, equipment broke free, and the lights died. A scream was cut short by the wrenching shriek of tortured metal as the tank settled at a 60-degree angle, its left track spinning uselessly in the air. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died, leaving an echoing silence pierced only by the moans of the wounded and the frantic hiss of escaping steam. In the German Treline, Oberleutnant Weber allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. One Sherman destroyed. One immobilized and captured. Only one angler remained operational. His mission was an overwhelming success. He raised his binoculars, expecting to see the crew of the overturned tank bailing out, surrendering. They did not emerge. Inside Adventure, Sergeant Jim Orr came to with blood trickling from a gash above his eye. The tank was a tomb listing into the earth. He could hear the muffled cries of the wounded from the driver's compartment, the choked sobs of a man in shock. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, fuel, and fear. Through the vision blocks, he saw only sky and the twisted metal of his own fender. "Report!" he croaked, his voice raw. One by one, the voices came back. Miraculously, no one was dead. But they were trapped. The main hatches were pinned against the ground. The escape hatches in the belly were inaccessible, crushed into the soft soil. They were entombed in their own steel. Outside, Sergeant Jack Ellis and Angler watched in horror. He saw the Mark IV Panzer begin to creep forward from its position, a predator moving in for the kill. He saw German infantry, emboldened, starting to advance from the woods in a tactical crouch, moving to secure the overturned hull and take prisoners. His own tank was the last viable fighting unit. Every instinct, every rule of engagement, screamed at him to withdraw. To save his crew and his tank. To live to fight another day. He looked at the overturned Adventure, knowing his friends were inside. He looked at the advancing Germans. He made his choice. "Gunner! Sabo! Track that Mark IV! Driver, advance 50 yards hard right. We're not leaving them." Angler surged forward, not away. It was a move of sheer, suicidal audacity. It placed Ellis directly between the advancing Germans and the crippled Adventure. The German infantry scattered, diving for cover as Angler's hull machine gun opened up, spraying the field. The German Mark IV commander, confident in his victory, had been slow. He'd expected retreat, not a countercharge. As his gunner frantically traversed the turret, Ellis's gunner, a 19-year-old from Liverpool named Ken Miller, found his sight picture. On! Fire! Angler's 75mm gun bucked. The armor-piercing discarding sabot round, a lethal needle of tungsten, crossed the field in a blink. It did not hit the Mark IV's well-sloped front plate. It struck the junction of its track and forward road wheel. With a spectacular shower of sparks and shredded metal, the Panzer's track disintegrated. It lurched, spun a quarter turn, and stopped dead, its own mobility instantly crippled. The duel was now between a mobile Sherman and a stationary German, but the Germans still had a working, lethal gun. Inside the overturned Adventure, Orr heard the shot, the impact, and the cheers from Engler's crew over the radio net. Hope, sharp and desperate, flared. They were not abandoned. But they were still trapped, and the German infantry was still out there, now angry and determined. Using the confusion of Engler's charge, one of the Antelope crewmen inside, the driver who'd regained his senses, had an idea. He pointed to the pistol port on the rear of the turret, a small, armored hatch for disposing of spent shell casings. It was clear of the ground. Working in the dark, bleeding, they wrestled the heavy mechanism open. A slit of dusky light and cold air flooded in. It was too small for a man. But it was a lifeline. Orr grabbed the wireless microphone. "Jack! We're popping the pistol port. We can pass out the wounded. Can you cover us?" From his turret, Ellis saw the small, black opening appear on the overturned hull. He also saw a German MG-34 team setting up behind a pile of farm rubble, directly covering it. They were waiting for the survivors to emerge, to make themselves targets. Ellis's voice was calm and final. "We'll cover you. Get them out." He knew what he had to do. Engler would have to become an unbreakable shield. And a shield, in the face of determined anti-tank fire, does not last long. Dusk surrendered to a moonless, star-veiled night. The battlefield, so recently a cauldron of noise, fell into an uneasy, punctuated silence. The crippled Mark IV Panzer, Führerzauber, was a dark hulk 500 yards away, its crew having abandoned it after Engler's disabling shot. But the German infantry, under Oberleutnant Weber's command, had not retreated. They had simply melted back into the darker pools of shadow in the woods and the ditches, establishing a tight, invisible cordon. They owned the night. Inside the overturned Adventure, the rescue was a painstaking, agonizing ballet conducted in pitch blackness and whispered agony. The pistol port was a circle barely 10 inches across. The wounded gunner from Antelope, Private Shaw, was first. Dosed with morphine, his leg a mess of bandages, he was gently, inexorably pushed through the tight steel orifice into the waiting arms of men from Engler crouched below, who then dragged him through the mud to the dubious safety of their own tank. It took 20 minutes. The driver from Antelope with a concussion was next. All the while, Engler stood guard. Sergeant Jack Ellis had positioned it in a slight depression, its frontal armor facing the greatest threat from the woods. He dared not run the engine, lest the sound give away precise movements. The night was their only blanket. The crew took turns on watch, eyes straining at the impenetrable black, ears tuned to the slightest rustle or clink of equipment. Every few minutes, Ellis would order a short, brutal burst of machine gun fire into pre-registered points in the tree line, not to hit anything, but to remind the Germans they were still awake, still deadly. In the woods, Weber understood the game. A direct night assault on an alert Sherman was a butcher's bill he couldn't pay. But he could apply pressure. He ordered sporadic rifle fire, the bullets pinging harmlessly off Engler's thick hide. He sent a 2-man patrol to creep forward and try to place a Teller mine. They were spotted by the sharp-eyed loader, and a single high-explosive shell from Engler's main gun sent them scrambling back, empty-handed. The explosion lit up the field for a second, freezing the scene in a stark, monochrome snapshot. The overturned Adventure, the watchful Engler, the scattered, dark forms of men. The real enemy was time, and the creeping cold. Inside Adventure, now emptied of the wounded, the remaining 5 men, Orr, Bone, and 3 of their original crew, huddled in the freezing steel. Their greatcoats were scant protection against the metal that leached all warmth. They shared sips of icy water from a canteen and tried not to think about the fuel and ammunition surrounding them. A single German incendiary round could turn their tomb into a furnace. Sergeant Tichbone, his face a mask of dirt and dried blood, spoke into the darkness. "They're waiting for first light, Jim. When they can see properly, that's when they'll come with everything." Orr knew he was right. The German commander was professional. He had them contained. At dawn, he could bring up more infantry, or even a portable Panzerschreck rocket launcher, to finish Engler at close range. Then it would be over. A desperate plan formed in Orr's mind. It was less a tactic and more a gamble on human psychology. "We have to make them think we're stronger than we are," he whispered. "We have to make them think relief is coming." He explained it to Bone, then used the barely functioning wireless, its battery fading, to relay it to Ellis and Engler. The plan was audacious, ridiculous, and their only hope. An hour before the first gray smear of dawn, the silent field erupted in a new kind of fury. From Engler, every weapon that could fire did. The main gun blasted a high-explosive shell into the woods. The coaxial Browning machine gun hammered. The Hall machine gun joined in. From the pistol port of the overturned Adventure, the crew inside added the staccato bark of their Sten gun and the sharp crack of their Lee Enfield rifles, firing blind into the night. It was not aimed at fire. It was a volcano of noise and light, a defiant, screaming performance. For 30 seconds it was absolute bedlam. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. In the echoing silence that followed, a new sound took its place. From the Engler's open commander's hatch, Sergeant Jack Ellis, his voice hoarse and amplified by a megaphone they used for infantry coordination, shouted into the darkness with all the authority he could muster. "B Company, form on me! Prepare to advance! Left flank, move up! Bren guns, covering positions there!" He was barking orders to a company that did not exist. In the German Treline, Oberleutnant Weber, crouched in his foxhole, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. The sudden, extravagant expenditure of ammunition, the shouted orders in clear, confident English. It didn't sound like a last stand. It sounded like a reinforcement. What if the British had patrols out? What if this stubborn rearguard had been a bait all along? Doubt, the commander's true enemy, seated itself in his mind. The sky was lightening from black to gunmetal gray. He had to decide: press the attack with his depleted force against what might now be a prepared defense, or withdraw with his prisoners and his captured tank intact. He looked at the field, at the silhouette of the watchful Engler, and listened to the tense, waiting silence that had followed the British display. A silence that now felt deeply, dangerously ambiguous. The gray light of dawn did not so much break as it seeped, a cold, damp infiltration that slowly defined the world. It revealed the scarred field, the overturned Adventure like a beached metal whale, the silent, vigilant Engler, and the smoke still curling from the woods. It also revealed the absence. Oberleutnant Franz Weber and his Kampfgruppe were gone. Under the cover of that final, pre-dawn darkness, doubt had crystallized into decision. The British performance of strength, the shouted orders to non-existent units, had tipped the scales. The prize, one captured and one immobilized British tank, was significant. But the potential cost of walking into a reinforced infantry ambush at first light was unacceptable. Just before 0500, Weber had given the orders for a silent, disciplined withdrawal. They took their wounded, they salvaged what they could from their own crippled Mark IV, and they vanished back into the deep Dutch woods, becoming ghosts once more. On the field, the British tankers watched the Treline, their nerves frayed to filaments. As the minutes ticked past and no attack materialized, a slow, disbelieving hope began to thaw their frozen dread. Sergeant Ellis, his eyes burning from lack of sleep, scanned the woods through his binoculars. No movement. No glint of optics. The machine gun nests were empty. "Jim," he said over the radio, his voice a dry rasp. I think they've buggered off." Inside Adventure, the 5 men waited, barely breathing. After 30 more minutes of unnatural quiet, Sergeant Orr made the decision. Using the pistol port, he and Bone wriggled out into the cold, brightening morning. The air tasted unimaginably clean. They moved in a low crouch, stand guns ready, towards the tree line. They found the abandoned German positions, empty shell casings, the imprints of bodies in the mud, a discarded field dressing. The enemy had retreated. A strange, hollow victory settled over them. They had held the bridge for 48 hours. They had lost a tank, crippled another, and suffered wounded. And the bridge had never been in danger. By 0800, the real world finally intruded. A patrol from the genuine British 5th Division, advancing cautiously up the road from the east, found them. The soldiers stared at the surreal scene, the two battered Shermans, one on its side, the other idling wearily, the exhausted, blackened crews sitting on the ground. The lieutenant in charge listened to Orr's report with a look of deepening incredulity. "You've been where? On whose orders?" He consulted his own maps and radio logs. "Human Bridge was secured day before yesterday. Your squadron been looking for you. They thought you'd been overrun." There were no cheers. No medals were pinned on the spot. There was only a profound, bone-deep weariness and the bureaucratic confusion of a military machine trying to process a clerical error that had nearly gotten men killed. The crews of Adventure and Angler were evacuated. Recovery vehicles eventually righted Adventure and towed it away. Antelope was declared a total loss. In the after-action reports, the incident was logged as a navigation error leading to unsanctioned engagement. The three sergeants were quietly reprimanded for deviating from their last verified orders, even as they were commended for the extrication of their wounded and their defensive actions. The paperwork buried the truth in bland, official language. But in the woods east of Nijmegen, the secret remained. The scarred earth where the tanks had fought. The shell casings sinking into the loam. The story of 3 tanks who guarded a bridge that needed no guard, who fought a battle that shouldn't have happened, and who, through a combination of error, loyalty, and a brazen bluff, somehow survived to become a forgotten footnote in the vast, chaotic narrative of war. They were not heroes of a great strategic victory. They were something else, survivors of a phantom order, guardians of a secret in the woods that only the crows, the pines, and the men who were there would ever truly know.